Last part of our outline here as the sort of the beginning of the cardiovascular system, and there is one more outline we're going to go through. So an electrocardiograph or electrocardiography, ECG or EKG. The reason you hear the term EKG, the guy that actually came up with the whole concept of a machine to record this was a German. And in Germany, you spell cardiac with a K, and medicine always honors tradition, so it's actually called an EKG most of the time. The heart, when it contracts, it has an electrical conduction system. We already covered that. So this being electrical currents, action potentials, that machine is specialized to pick up those electrical signals. And also, you can filter out other stimuli, other muscle contractions. This is why you can run on a treadmill and have an EKG on you. But an ECG is actually monitoring this little conduction system and any issues that might arise from that. So if you've never seen a machine before, I have a little introduction for you. All right, how do you do EKGs? Well, this is actually a 12-lead EKG, and I wanted to show you. So here are the electrodes, and then you see the wires. Now this guy is going to plug these wires into this little outlet portion, or it's like a coupling thing, and then that part is going to go over here to the little ECG machine. And this one's a paper one. See the paper coming out of the bottom, so he's laying him down. He's telling them, I really hope I have these correct and I don't have the polarity reversed. No, I'm kidding. But so he's putting these here, and then there's the machine. He's explaining something to do with the lower half of the body. I'll just skip that one. And then anyway, when you push this button, and then what you can do is you can change the different channels on that machine to show all different views of the heart. So if you've never seen an EKG machine, there he goes. He's pushing it. He's adjusting. That might be the gain. It looks like that's guy's heart rate. Good Lord. But there it comes. And look, today most ECGs or EKG machines are digital, but there are some that still give you a printout sheet. Okay, I hope that helped. You can actually see how the whole thing is set up. Now, we're going to go through the waves, or what is that machine picking up? How do you read a basic EKG? Well, the waves are going to look something like this. And that little diagram going up and down, that represents one heartbeat, one cardiac cycle. You can see a lot of times, and this one is perfect. I mean, perfect. Most real live EKGs don't look like that. I used to do these in the hospital. I used to set people up on them. But you can actually see the waves right there as well. So each wave represents a part of the cardiac cycle, and there is some physiology involved. Okay, so first things first. I thought I had one on the... Thought I had a flat EKG. So, okay, well, here's one. So what I'm going to do, these are all the waves. Here's a P wave. Here's a QRS complex. There's 3 waves within that, and then there's a T wave. That represents one heartbeat. So, what is a P wave? A P wave represents what is called atrial depolarization. 3, 2, 1, out. In 3, 2, 1. Atrial depolarization, remember when a muscle depolarizes, sodium is rushing into the muscle fiber, potassium ions are rushing out when it's repolarizing, and that electrical activity is picked up by the machine and it registers as what is called a deflection. So that's when you get that first little wave. In fact, see that picture? It's actually showing the SA node firing a signal which is causing the atria to contract, which generates electricity, and it shows up as a little P wave there. Next part, and well, there it is. Okay, so I'll go through this in a second. Okay, the QRS complex is the next section of the waves. The Q, a lot of people don't have Q waves, but it goes QRS represents ventricular depolarization. In other words, when the ventricles are contracting. And like on that picture, I'm going to go back to this one. You can see the QRS there. That represents ventricular depolarization. Now, the atria, when they contract, excuse me, they have to repolarize. And that would actually show up on this machine. Repolarization is ions moving back and forth. It would actually, the machine would pick it up. The problem is it happens during when the ventricles are contracting, so you can't see it. And one thing I'll just point out, and we'll go through this whole thing, but see the little delay here, then it goes boom, 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 and then there's a delay there, and then that. This is when blood is flowing from the top chambers here down to the bottom chambers, and the bottom chambers contract. Now, after the ventricles contract, they have to repolarize. They're a muscle, just like a nerve and a muscle. When they repolarize and the ions, potassium is moving back out and the electrical charge is being restored across the cell membrane, remember the sarcolemma, what's called the resting membrane potential, that registers as a T wave. It actually shows up on the machine, and that's what that represents, called ventricular repolarization. So we can go through the whole thing. So you're measuring this whole electrical system. It's picked up by the electrocardiograph. Here are all the steps, and there's one at the top. So like I was saying, here's the SA node sending out a signal. It's creating a P wave. It shows that the ventricles are contracting. Now this diagram goes pretty detailed. Look, it's actually showing now the signals reach the AV node. And see this little delay I was telling you about, when between here and the bundle of His, there is a delay. And that's a good thing because it allows blood, when these ventricles contract and they push blood down to the bottom, it allows blood to flow into the ventricles. See the QRS? See, that's the signal traveling up this way and that way, and it's causing the ventricles to contract, to depolarize. So it registers as all that electrical activity. There's a lot more muscle in the ventricles than the atria, so that's why it shows up those big deflections. And then the signal has reached all the way up into the ventricles, so there is a delay there, and then this is showing the ventricles repolarizing after they have contracted. If the ventricles did not repolarize, then this T wave would not be there, and this would flatten out, and that'd be trouble. That's called asystole. Asystole is where you have depolarized fibers that never repolarized again. And there it is. Now they're ready to go again. So going back to one more time. So here we go. See the P, Q, the R, the S, and the T. And that's not actually a great one. This one's a little better. It just goes super fast. There's the P. Got my mouse on it. There's the Q. Like I said, it's very small. Most people don't have it. Wait, right there. And then here is the R. And then I'll leave it down here. S there. And then you see the T waves kind of flat, little, it's taller, but it's kind of spread out a little bit more right there. That's a T wave. So that's how to read an EKG. Very simple, basic EKG. That's not a 12 lead, has all different levels and all different views of the heart. A standard EKG could be like 3 leads. It's left and right wrist, and then left leg, and so anyway, so that's it. You have to know what does each wave represent, of course, and then kind of what one looks like. Blood pressure, last thing. Blood pressure is the amount of pressure pushing blood through your system. The systolic represents the highest pressure in an artery. It occurs during ventricular systole. We went through those terms. The diastolic represents the lowest pressure in an artery, and it's called filling pressure a lot of times. And it represents when it occurs during ventricular diastole, when the ventricles are relaxed. How you measure it, if you've never done that before. So here's the brachial artery. That's a very common one for blood pressure because it's right next to the heart. It gives you a good estimation. So you put this little cuff around it, this thing here. The gauge, cool name. The gauge is called the sphygmomanometer. That little pump, you air it up. See, it's constricting the artery. You can air it up to a certain number if you wish. And then there's a little valve right there. And then once you air this up to a certain amount, and what you do is you put the stethoscope, you put that right either underneath the cuff or right there kind of where the antecubital area of the elbow is. And then if you can't, okay, you don't hear anything because you've completely shut off blood flow. Once you start letting the pressure off, blood is not flowing at this point. Once you start twisting that knob and letting the pressure off, blood will start flowing under the cuff. It'll start hitting blood on the other side. You'll hear like a thumping sound. It sounds like heart contractions, but it's not. And when you hear the first sound, you're supposed to look at your little gauge and what was the pressure, and that's showing 120. You keep letting the pressure off. You have uniform blood flow. The sound of the thumping is going to disappear because there's no more separation anymore and blood is flowing under the cuff. When you no longer hear the sound, you look at the gauge again. That represents the diastolic, and that's showing 70. So that's how you take blood pressure. And like I said, the upper value sort of represents ventricular systole, and the lower value represents ventricular diastole. So here are some things that affect your blood pressure, and it is measured. It's mmHg, millimeters of mercury, millimeters Huggy. Here's some normal values, and these are all the factors that affect it: age, sex, size, mental attitude, activity, health. You know, if you're an angry person, you might have a higher blood pressure. But hypertension and hypotension. Here they are. And let me make this a little bigger. Hypertension or hypertensive is considered above 140 on the systolic, and this is going to vary on some times, but this is what we're using. Above 90 on the diastolic. Hypotension is below 90 on the systolic and below 60 on the diastolic, which would be miserable, I would think. But, oops, didn't need to see that. Anyway, so that is blood pressure. It's a good measurement for some, if people have high blood pressure, it's considered not healthy. It damages arteries, puts pressure on the heart. The heart will actually hypertrophy. The left ventricle will, if you have blood pressure like for long periods of your life, because the constant force will make the muscle develop, which is not a good thing. But that's blood pressure. All right, and we have one more video to go. Thanks.